Hi, today I'm going to show you how you can cut a rebate in a larger section using a circular saw and also a biscuit jointer, and after that I'll take you over to the workshop where I shall be demonstrating it on a table saw. I'm going to be cutting this chunk of oak. It's reasonably flat, although not exactly, and it's reasonably square, again not exact. And generally when you're working with bigger timbers like this and cutting rebates and doing other joinery, you'll find it's not quite as precise. You could surface these and make it a perfectly squared up section, but for the demonstration this can be perfectly fine. Now this has actually got some nails or screws in it here, so I'm going to be using a multi-cut blade, multi-material blade from Evolution. I'm not planning on going as deep as they are, but if I do, at least I won't damage the saw. Now first thing you'll see is I've added an extra section to my fence. Just gives me that little bit extra control. I've set both the distance of the blade from the fence and also the depth of cut. So I'll make my first cut through here, and then I'll flip this piece around and work with the base of the saw on this side. Always make sure your workpiece isn't going to move on you, and in the case of small or lightweight pieces, then make sure they're clamped down to something a bit heavier. There's a tendency for the waste piece of material to shoot out in front of the saw once you finish this second cut, and then you can just release pressure on the fence so it doesn't trap it quite so much. Or you could also use an L-shaped fence, as I'll demonstrate when I go through the use of the table saw for rebates. I've just readjusted my settings to take a much larger rebate here, so larger depth of cut, bigger width of cut. I'm sure you noticed the sparks there as we went through the screws. It's a lot safer to cut a L-shaped section from a larger piece like I'm doing here than it is to try and cut a large rebate in a small section. Now we can do a similar process with the biscuit jointer. I'll do round on this edge. Although possible, I don't recommend it, and these are the reasons why. Now biscuit jointer can't do as deep a cut. I think it's fair to say biscuits aren't that deep, so the capacity of a biscuit jointer is somewhat less. So you'll see on here, depth of cut is perhaps ½ an inch. I've set the fence to ½ an inch away from the blade as well, so we make both cuts to get a square rebate. The jointer will snatch if you feed it the wrong way, as I'll demonstrate here. And since they're not designed for sideways travel, the correct direction isn't always necessarily obvious.
on my jointers. They both need to be fed left to right, but it's not necessarily the case for all manufacturers. Full depth of cut is only achieved by pushing hard against the workpiece. That's awkward to do for the whole cut, and so you'll often end up having to make multiple passes to make sure you've got a consistent depth. Small base and fence on the machine means that it follows uneven surfaces much more closely, and these are reflected in the quality of the rebate cuts. A small number of teeth in these blades mean that they'll dull quite quickly if used for this sort of thing. I also find the awkward use of the biscuit jointer means that the waste piece always gets shot out quite violently at the end of the cut.
The fence that you're tracking with on the biscuit jointer is a lot smaller, so it catches in all the irregularities on the surface a lot easier. Now, I didn't quite have the right depth of cut over here, but there's a reasonable rebate which you could clean up with a shoulder plane. Now, I've actually decided to do this on the Evolution site saw instead of down in the machine shop, because this has got one of the blades that will cut through any more nails that might be in there, so that's a safe way to go. Now, on a table saw you can't cut a rebate if you've got a hood collecting dust over the top of it, so that's got to go. Now, as you might have noticed as I was cutting with the circular saw and also with the biscuit jointer, comes a point where you detach the corner that you're cutting out and it's jammed between the blade and the rest of the workpiece, and it gets shot out the end. So that's something to watch out for if you're doing it that way. If you're doing it on a table saw, exactly the same thing can happen. It can trap between the blade and the fence and it'll be shot out towards the operator if he's standing in front of the blade. So actually, when you're using a table saw, you should never stand right in front of the blade, always stand to one side. But one of the things we can do to prevent that happening is to switch the fence around so that we have a gap the size of our rebate or larger, so that section that's being cut away isn't jammed up between the fence. It's free to just fall away to the side. When this piece becomes free from the rest of the work, it's not trapped against the fence, it's floating underneath there, and so it shouldn't get shot out, at least without any force. Clearly you can make this L-shaped fence out of plywood and clamp it to the fence of your table saw. Just lays where it fell off, doesn't get jammed up against anything, and it's perfectly safe, and we end up with quite a nice rebate. So there's 3 different ways of cutting rebates on a circular saw, the biscuit jointer, and also the table saw. Do take care, use all the safety precautions that you should do with these tools, and follow manufacturers' guidelines. Cheerio.